we're going to get started. This is kind of the first of our kind of official departmental ground rounds, where we invite staff from the department to give talks in areas of their expertise and in subject matter that would be of interest to all divisions and all members. And in addition, we're looking to get invited speakers as well through Zoom now. I think hopefully that'll be an easy thing to do. I'd like to thank Dr. Ed Harvey for being kind of the inaugural, if you were visiting professor through Zoom, local visiting professor anyway. I think most of us know Ed very well. I know Ed since I was a medical student. Yeah, inside out, yeah. Since I was a medical student. And I have to tell you, Ed is a professor of surgery. Ed is actually a well-known scientist in his own right. He's also editor of the Canadian Journal of Surgery, which that's what his talk is going to be about today. In addition to being a fairly busy clinical surgeon as well, Ed is also an entrepreneur and has a successful startup company as well. So Ed really touches every little area in surgery, either be education, innovation, or research. So it's really a pleasure to have him today. And the other thing, of course, as you know, is Ed's an athlete, an extremely well-versed hockey player, and an avid cyclist. And so with that, I'm going to let you take it away, Ed.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for attending. I especially like to thank my surgeons, Kevin and Leanne, for inviting me to the inaugural event, and I hope I live up to your expectations. Okay, a belated start, but here we go. So I'm going to present on the Canadian Journal of Surgery. My disclosures, Kevin mentioned them. There's really no conflict with any product mentioned here except for me being the editor of the Canadian Journal of Surgery. So the objectives today were to talk about a little brief history of the journal, its place in McGill and Canadian surgery, the reality of journal editing and publishing, one sentence on what editors really want, and a little bit about predatory publishing, which is becoming a bigger problem in the field and in the academic field. So just as an overview, I'm very honored to be entrusted with this position. The Canadian Journal of Surgery has had a strong McGill presence over the years. It's been 63 years running. I've had about 40 years of editor-in-chief presence from McGill. My predecessors were Lloyd McLean and Joe Meekins, obviously. The current AEs, we have 4 members at McGill staff that are current associate editors, and some of the associate editors are former McGillians. So all in all, fairly strong McGill presence in this journal. The journal really is about publishing topics that are important to us. And ever since its inception, and actually the inception of most journals in Quebec, it's really been about publishing Canadian surgical lore. Whether that's randomized trials or opinions or protocols, and we try to make way for Canadians to have a voice. These are some of the examples of what's going on over the last 4 or 5 years. This is the last, in the box here is the last publication, and basically we have a wide range of subjects. We published in that journal on cardiac surgery, evaluation of trauma resources in rural Alberta, general surgery in Canada. These are things that can't get published elsewhere, but have a strong impact on how medicine is delivered in Canada. And we published, and here's a randomized controlled trial out of the University of Montreal. So we do publish science as well, and I'm fairly proud of the good science that we actually publish. And recently, in our discussions in surgery section, we've been really excluding all else for the COVID push and trying to publish what people in Canada are doing to address COVID. The Canadian Journal, as I mentioned, has a long history. About 3 years ago, Vivian McAllister and I published about the journal at 60. It's now 63 years of continuous publication, which is the longest surviving journal in organized surgery in Canada. And we're fairly proud of that. Actually started back in 1824. Dr. Tessier started the Quebec Medical Journal. And this actually predates the McGill Med School. And he advocated for med school in Quebec at the time and founded the Quebec Medical Society. And since the last 2 centuries, since Tessier started that journal, more than 20 periodicals have been published about surgery or medicine in Canada. So that medical school that he advocated for in 1829 became McGill's first functioning academic unit. The medical school came online at McGill. It was successful. It was really based at the Montreal General Hospital at the time. Unbeknownst at the time, we also excluded several very prominent physicians and surgeons as we set up the school, and a rival school set up across the mountain. And at that school, they published the Montreal Medical Gazette, which is became the British American Journal of Medical and Physical Science, and lasted for a little while. And it was very influential in that group actually established a prominent medical surgical society here. The editor of that journal proposed an association of societies that went on to become the Canadian Medical Association in 1867, all out of the group in Montreal. And as that journal that they were publishing right out of steam, Dr. William Wright founded the Montreal Monthly Journal of Medical Medicine and Surgery in 1853. Wright actually graduated from McGill fairly young, but he was British North America's first Black doctor. So part of the history of journals in Canada was a fairly prominent position at the time. Later on, faculty members at the Montreal Medical Journal actually founded the Canadian Medical Association Journal. And in 1911, it really amalgamated all the other journals that were lying around and became the CMAJ. There's a good balance in favor of medical and surgical topics initially, but then it really became a predominantly medical journal. So in 1957, CGS was established to address surgical problems, and as a result of a collaboration between the Canadian Departments of Surgery, the Royal College, and the CMA. And that's what is now known as the Canadian Journal of Surgery. And the founding editorial board was chairs of surgery at 12 medical schools in Canada. And the president of the Royal College at the time, Robert Janes out of Toronto, became the chairman of the board and the first editor-in-chief. The Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons subsidized the journal until 1991, and then they went in favor of their own journal. And it's sort of the litany of every editor-in-chief since then is how we funded the Canadian Journal of Surgery. The Canadian Association of General Surgeons is actually the major sponsor of the journal right now, and we've had a fairly successful relationship with KEGS. For part of this talk, I actually went back and looked at the first volume we ever published, first edition, just to see what was going on in Canadian medicine at the time. And oddly enough, a rampant pandemic infection was the problem in the hospitals. This one was just Staphylococcus. But if you look in that article, there's a very poignant picture which showed the spread of fluorescent powder on a pseudo patient and showing how Staphylococcus was spread, and actually reminds me of a lot of the COVID pictures that are out right now in the literature of how COVID is spread. So despite 63 years on, we're still doing the same kind of research and having the same kind of problems. The journal is actually doing okay at this point. I actually found a Wikipedia page. I had no idea we had a Wikipedia page for the journal, and it was kind of interesting. The journal has published about 6,000 citable articles. The entire library is online. Vivian McAllister did a great job putting that online through the Western Ontario Library. So you can get every single edition online. Wikipedia shows that we have a fairly good citation rate per article, and our impact factor has increased. When I came on board, it was 0.6. It's now 2.5, and it hovers around 2 to 2.5 over the last 4 years. The journal's H-index is 55, which is actually extremely good. The reason for this is that we made a point of publishing good science. And even though we have Canadian-centric topics, they're cited because Canadian medicine uses our topics to make protocols. We don't accept case reports, and we're COPE compliant, which I'll talk about later. It's all part of why the journal is a good journal. Because I was sort of tired, when I came on board as editor-in-chief, everyone said, yeah, but it's the Canadian Journal of Surgery. But yeah, it's the Canadian Journal of Surgery. And if you look at our H factor, this is the H index of the top 10 journals in surgery worldwide. 55 is the H index of surgery. That's what our H index is. So we're a top 10 journal. We're just very much a Rodney Dangerfield. We don't get very much respect. And that's a very Canadian part of being the Canadian Journal of Surgery. But I'm very proud of what we've got to today. We've also branched out a little bit. We now have a podcast. It's been very successfully received. We have a lot of different subjects. You can see these are some of the last subjects that we've covered. And if you look at one of the podcasts from this year, it was actually Andrew Fury, who's a trauma surgeon in Newfoundland, who started Team Broken Earth, which led our mission to Haiti during the earthquake. But he's just become the premier of Newfoundland. So interesting podcast with interesting people. So we're trying to get more and more topics covered with our podcast. It's very well received. Other benefits of the Canadian Journal of Surgery: McGill has a sponsorship as one of the 12 founding members, and you get a diminished cost on your submission and article processing, as well as McGill itself gets other benefits. That brings me to talk about publications in general. There are a lot of alternatives to Canadian Journal of Surgery, obviously. Everyone knows there's about 2,000 journals published, publishers globally, and 30,000 active scholarly peer-reviewed journals. That's a lot. Biomedical makes up about 30% of the total, and the number of articles is just growing. It's about 3% per year, year after year. The top 10 publishers publish about 35% of the journals, and 4 publishers have about 1,000 journals each. And 5 editorial groups publish more than half of all academic papers in the peer-reviewed literature. It's a lot of power for these people. We're obviously not in one of these editorial groups, but we are trying to compete. There's many models of how we publish. The average cost of publishing an article is not free, as many people think. It actually costs a lot of money. It's estimated to be about $4,000 in a subscription-based journal with print and electronic editions. As part of the reason we shifted from being a print version to all online. Different models have changed the cost. The conventional firewall model is what people are mostly familiar with, pay-per-view. There's delayed open access, and we are a full open access journal, and then there's even self-archiving, which is cheaper. But cheaper is not free. So cost of publishing a journal is made up of a lot of things that you don't see behind the kind of behind the curtain. Cost for an editorial office, typesetting, journal managing, IT, publishing, etc. You can get rid of some of this by going to open access. In particular, you get rid of a lot of the sales force and some of the publishing staff, some of the management problems, but you don't get rid of typesetting, you don't get rid of legal, which has become a bigger and bigger problem, and actually IT hosting becomes a bigger cost. But it is a little cheaper. So how do costs break down? And just a little bit of a look behind what we do, so that people who ask me all the time, why isn't it free to publish? No, why it's not free to publish? It still costs money. If this looks at this cost graph, when you go from print and online down to online to open access, which is where we've gone to, you really simplify sale administration, a little bit of user administration. So you get rid of this orange box, which is the other cost, which is really printing, but you never totally get rid of all the costs. Your margin decreases a little bit. Our margin is razor thin. At CJS, it's almost a non-profit. We pay for our editorial, and the Canadian Medical Association actually pays for our overage every year. But why do we do it, and why do other publishers do it? Well, this is why. This is a list of some of the most successful companies at making money. See, Walmart has a 25% operating profit. Rio Tinto might have a less operating profit now they blew up some mines in Australia. Apple has a 25% operating margin, and the major journal publishers have an even higher operating profit margin. So what does that mean? That means they're making a lot of money, but it also means it's a target. So this large profit margin has allowed the entrance of predatory publishing. And so there's hundreds of new publishers and journals with less ethical background than most of the journals. Roughly 1/3 of emails received to a single surgeon's email inbox, and this is Chad Ball's inbox from Calgary, and they were predatory in nature, and these are the ones he received this year. it's really difficult to navigate that extensive web of a kind of deceitful emails you get about, you publish here, you could be an editor here, and it's hard to tell which of those journals are real. And it's become a real problem because the lack of adequate peer review really dilutes our quality of publications. It holds up publications that otherwise would go into better journals and be cited. There's hidden charges with these journals that are not revealed in the initial email, and other problems. And it used to be a little easier to determine what journals were in this predatory category. It was simple. You would just go and check who is cited in the and had an impact factor. If they didn't, they're pretty well a predatory journal. But the predatory journals have been around long enough that now sometimes they are cited. So it's become a little more difficult. There's no absolute litmus test. There's a great article in Nature in December 2019 of what makes up a predatory journal. I encourage everyone to go read that. But they're basically journals that are really prioritize themselves for making money at the expense of scholarship. There's very little overview. There's publications, great articles on people sending in articles that just say publish this journal, publish in your journal, and getting accepted, paying $4,000 and having a publication. So there really is, at the point, no absolute litmus test. Many checklists have been made. It's really, though, a common sense thing. You shouldn't trust any unsolicited emails. You should review issues of the journal, see what's published, see what's going on. Look at the website, make sure there's no errors in the website. Journals have been hijacked by very similar websites, so you have to be careful you're on the right website. And I'll tell you, there's people at McGill on the editorial boards of several predatory journals when I check through, and that you should be careful not to be associated with this kind of journal. It's really not helping anyone else in academia. One of the tools that we use as the Surgical Journal Editors Group, which is about 120 journals, and we belong to this committee on public ethics. This website's extremely useful. All the major established publishers are part of this group, code of conduct that kind of excludes most predatory journals. They also have great algorithms that are not just used for the editors, but for people writing articles. So if you're having a problem determining how your authorship should go or where you should publish, or they have great references for that and flowcharts to step you through it. And we use these flowcharts for authorship debates. When people send in, I should be first author, second author, or third author, we go back to these in order to have some backup. Other resources on what journals are predatory or not. Beall's list of fake journals and publishers has been the go-to list. Caltech library list has fake conference hosts, so there's fake conferences as well. Cabell's list has good and bad articles, and the directory of open access journals. So these 3 or 4 kind of resources are really important to figure out if your journal has approached you as a predatory journal or not. Beall had to take down his list because one of the large predatory publishers sued him repeatedly, but others have posted it. And just to show the scope of the problem, about 1,200 predatory publishers exist, 1,300 standalone journals. There's misleading metrics on 53 other publisher sites, and hijacked journals, which I thought would be rare. There's about 150 of them 3 years ago. There's no good list to rule them all, as they say in Lord of the Rings jargon. You can look at Cabell's list, Beall's list, and DOAJ list, but there's still some overlap between them. But at least there's some resources in order to determine what journal you should publish in. So to wrap up, basically, Canadian Journal of Surgery is a large piece of Canadian medical history. It's also a big piece of McGill history. And we are recruiting. We need reviewers and some associate editors. We publish Canadian content, great research and debate, and we are in the top 10 list of surgical journals. I just want to do an advertisement as I end. The CLIP IRR Accelerator is up and running. We're going to do a soft opening on C9. This is a picture of C9 as it is today. It was very different from when I was a resident. And we're looking for startups from any program. And I would just say thank you for the invitation. And entertaining questions. Let me just end the show.
Thanks very much, Ed. That's actually a great overview. I'm actually quite happy because I didn't know, as the commercial goes. But yeah, great job as well in bringing up the stature of the Canadian Journal of Surgery. The impact factor is as high as you say as a lot of other journals that we send our research to. Let me just look at the chat and see if there's anything that people have come up with. But while they're thinking maybe of some questions, I guess I have one question about the editorial concentration. I mean, do you think that editorial concentration is, you know, a good thing? It seems to me that there's a lot of high-powered journals within the hands of a few publishers. I don't know if that is that an issue, or am I just looking at something too much into it?
No, I think it is an issue in that they're running this obviously as a profit cash cow, right? But with the advent of predatory publishing, which is brought on by that, they're like the go-to journals now. So like if I'm worried that a journal is predatory and but it's published by Wiley or one of the big four, I've got a lot less worry that it's predatory. It's not a guarantee, but it's so the open access journals from those big four are more trustworthy. The print journals are more trustworthy. So it's hard to get rid of them entirely, for sure.
I guess one of the things I was alluding to was, you know, there have been a lot of COVID publications and then retractions and then letters to the editor and a lot of debate there. And I don't know if is that part of the reason, or is it just, you know, the thing that people want to get information out there ASAP?
I think on the COVID side, it's just people want to get information out ASAP. And I know for us, we decided that just Chad and I were going to read the COVID articles. That's why we put them in discussions in surgery as not being science. But if you look at the overall publications, retractions are the biggest problem with retractions is in high impact journals. So the New England Journal actually has the highest retraction rate of any journal, which isn't really like published or publicized, right? But it's because they take controversial papers that will be cited. That's how they get a high impact factor, right? So if you take controversial papers, you're going to have retractions. And the COVID falls into that. Everything about COVID is a little controversial because there's not a lot of science behind it when we started publishing, right?
Ed?
Sorry, Pat, just hang on. Sorry, Pat, just if you want to maybe just send it in through chat, if that's okay, because there's just some people that are doing that as well. So Leanne had a question. Can you provide any tips for what editors look for when a manuscript is submitted? What should people do to improve their chances of success?
Yeah, we've had a lot of debate about this because we get publications from all over the world. And I mean, Canada is obviously our number one, but we get a lot from, believe it or not, Iran, Turkey, China, and other countries, which you wouldn't think would be Canadian Journal of Surgery friendly. We've talked about putting up a guideline for submission, which I think we will. So we just want clear wording. We don't want a lot of running around. Good science is always rewarded. Canadian papers get reviewed. All of them get reviewed. We don't reject at the higher level of any Canadian paper. But if it's clear and succinct with good grammar and good spelling, they definitely get they definitely get evaluated with a clearer mind.
Okay. What's the just on a follow up to that question? What's the kind of acceptance rate?
Right. Okay, so that's a good question. The acceptance rate varies amongst a lot of journals. And if you look at the top 10 journal with the highest impact factors in the world, the acceptance rate just in that group of 10 ranges from 5% for the New England Journal of Medicine to 45% for a molecular biology journal. So the acceptance rate doesn't really reflect on the quality of the journal. Ours is closer to 30%, and it's mostly because we take a lot of the science that might not be, that's Canadian, that might not be quite up to par, and we flip it to discussions in surgery or some other kind of menu item in order to allow a publication, let's say, and a proof of principle kind of concept, and then tell the authors, go back and do the real research and come back and publish in the main article. So we do have around a 35%, I think, acceptance rate.
Okay. Sorry, Pat, you had a question. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
It's Pat. Oh, he left. Pat, you're muted.
So I just wanted to make sure that we have access to your slides, or if you publish this talk, like I know it's sort of self-advertising, but it's kind of interesting because, as Kevin pointed out, there's a lot of stuff that we're not aware of, and maybe that's part of your next editorial, and the history of it and the impact factor, and then maybe a second article would be, a warning to in the Canadian Journal of Surgery about not warning away from your journal, or warning towards your journal, but just saying, you have to be careful when you're publishing, because you can only publish one article once. So It may as well be in a high impact factor. And I guess part of the issue about, I would guess that the reason why your impact factor is important or high is because we're sort of you're a big dog in a small pool, right? So the Canadian surgeons are centered around academia, especially the specialists, and so our standards for the way we publish stuff and write stuff are fairly high. So that's why I would guess your impact factor is high. So you have to, I would guess, an editorial like that or articles say, beware of predatory articles, because you can only publish that one paper once, or your resident may want to try to get some, or your trainee might try to get some airtime, and then they end up somewhere else where, in fact, it should be in a high. So that's one of the things that might be important for us and in your journal. So I would encourage you to make that as a publication, because then it can be cited, right?
Yep. Thanks for the comment. Great. Good seeing you, Pat.
Plus, I like your slides. So.
Yeah, I'll go up online.
One of the reasons we had you is also, I remember when I was a resident, some of my first publications came out in the Canadian Journal, because at that time Joe Meekins was also the editor. I don't know if that helped, probably did, but tell us, do you have a kind of a special section for residents? Or, I mean, obviously residents that come in as first author, how is that looked at? Or how do you, as an editor, how do you do that?
Yeah, great question. We used to have a resident writing prize, which is actually named after Lloyd McLean. But we stopped getting applicants, so we just sort of dropped it over the years. I was happy having it, but people weren't that interested. I think it just was below the radar, or I don't know what it was. But the point is, we do prioritize Canadian publications. So I read every single submission, unfortunately, but I put them right to AE as long as they're okay, any Canadian publication. So the Canadian residents do get priority if that's coming in as a submission, for sure.
Okay. I'm just wondering when you get all the time to do everything and then ride 160 kilometers on your bike. But anyway.
Yeah. Thanks.
Dr. Freed asked, can you talk about plagiarism, how it is tracked?
Yep. Okay, so plagiarism is a very interesting subject. I'll just tell you that none of the predatory journals track plagiarism, so you can actually copy an article and get it published, and that's become a problem with some of our people. We do not subscribe to a plagiarism program, so there are plagiarism programs that you can just sub the journal into, the article into, and they'll tell you. And it's because it's been very frustrating. it's not perfect, any of the plagiarism products. So what happens is you'll do a article or a study on what, you know, your favorite subject, but it's something you've published about in the vicinity over the years. It'll come back as plagiarism because you're using a similar methodology to the one you used before, but that's actually what we want. We like very similar methodologies in order to validate research that's gone before. So we've had problems with the plagiarism products, so we haven't done that. What I do is, if I think this has been published before, or one of our editors do, is you can put portions into Google, and that'll come back as plagiarism on its own. So you don't have to worry about publishing it. But stuff can get through the cracks, definitely. I don't know if that answers your question, Jerry. We won't know.
Thanks, Ed. I just know that I've been on some editorial boards, and they make a big deal about this. And in fact, there's sanctions that, you know, that they impose on people in terms of publishing their work, et cetera. And one of the areas that is the most difficult, as you said, is in the methodology, particularly in a basic science thing where you describe how you do something, and you tend to cut and paste that. And I just wanted to alert people that that you have to be careful about that. I just didn't know if you had any words of advice. Yeah, no,
I think on the back end, I didn't realize you were asking about the back end, but that's what I alluded to about legal being a bigger and bigger cost, is that we have blackballed authors. We haven't done one in the last 2 years, but we have blackballed authors and told them they're not welcome to submit ever again. And it has been about plagiarism issues. So yeah, there is a repercussion from all that. We follow the COPE guidelines. So if you want to go to the COPE website and look at the algorithms, as part of signing on to COPE, all the surgical editors decided they were going to follow their guidelines. So the repercussions are there, and how we track are there. Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry. Any other questions for Ed?
I have a comment, Kevin. When we looked at surgical literature for the Lancet paper that Joe and I were involved in, and Jeff, one of the issues about impact really revolved around the fact that a lot of surgical journals had lowered the impact factor by allowing trainees to publish low quality papers, and one of them would be like the Journal of Cardiothoracic and Vascular Surgery. So the issue about that is you have to if you're going to do that, you have to sequester it. You have to sequester it as a part of an addition to your journal, so that it's not looked at as part of your actual publication, because it'll reflect on your impact factor.
That's a good point, Pat. One of the reasons we stopped doing case reports is that they're never cited. Now, they might be interesting to look at, but if you want to publish case reports, you should put them in your online presence, not in your journal.
Okay. Any other questions for Dr. Harvey before the OR starts calling us? Okay, well, look, Ed, thank you again very much on behalf of the department for doing this. I think it was actually for me anyway, and I think for a lot of other people, a very, knowledge opening session. And honestly, I would think that one of the things that you could take away from this is, I think here we're kind of surprised at what you're doing with the journal, and maybe you need to do a little bit of a journal roadshow and see what other, the other faculties can share with you about, putting some of their things into the Canadian Journal, because I think it's a great thing that you've been able to accomplish. So congratulations, and again, thanks for doing this for us, and hopefully we'll see you out there on the bike.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime you get in the bike, let me know.
All right. Okay, Ed, thanks very much. Goodbye,
thanks, everyone.
Everybody. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.